Imagine walking through a quiet Los Angeles neighborhood before sunrise. The air is cold, the streets are empty. Fog sits low over the ground like it is trying to cover something up. Then in a vacant lot just off the sidewalk, you notice what looks like a mannequin lying in the dirt. Except it is not a mannequin. It is a body. And by the time the sun rises on January 15th, 1947, Los Angeles is staring at one of the most disturbing crime scenes in its history. The victim was 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, later known to the world as the Black Dahlia. Her murder has never been solved. The FBI's account of the case confirms the body discovery, the identification process, and the fact that the case remained unsolved. Elizabeth Short was not some mythical Hollywood ghost. She was a young woman trying to survive in Southern California, drifting through a city built on dreams, image, and illusion. After her death, the press wrapped her in rumor, glamour, and cruelty, and the Black Dahlia legend grew larger than the woman herself. That myth is part of what makes this case so haunting. Even now, people still argue over who she really was, what happened in her final days, and whether the truth was ever truly within reach. And the murder itself was so brutal, so deliberate, that it turned into something between a true crime case and a nightmare. There was almost no blood at the scene. The body had been cut in half, it had been washed, it had been arranged. Investigators immediately believed Elizabeth had been killed somewhere else and then moved. The FBI's summary and other case histories described the body as severed and staged in a way that suggested the killer had time, control, and intent. On that January morning, Betty Bersinger was walking with her child when she spotted the body in the vacant lot. At first glance, she thought it might be a dummy or mannequin, because the pale skin and stillness made it look unreal. That illusion broke the moment she got close enough to understand what she was looking at. The body was naked, severed at the waist, and displayed in a way that felt intentional rather than random. By the time police arrived, the scene had already become the kind of place that stains memory forever. A lot of people know the Black Dahlia story as a mystery, but the first thing it was, before it became a mystery, was a horror scene. The autopsy made the case even darker. Elizabeth Short's body was examined on January 16, 1947. The report described ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, along with injuries and tissue loss. The body had been cut cleanly in half, with the lower section removed through the spine. That precision led investigators to wonder whether the killer had medical or anatomical knowledge. Case summaries of the autopsy and later histories of the case point to that same disturbing detail. The murder looked controlled, not chaotic. That matters, because this was not a crude act of violence that left behind confusion. It looked methodical. Someone had taken time. Someone had controlled the scene. Someone had done exactly what they meant to do and then vanished into the city. The autopsy and identification came together quickly enough that the FBI was able to help identify Elizabeth after fingerprints were sent through the old Newswire system. The Bureau says the identification took just 56 minutes after the fingerprints arrived. And once the identity was confirmed, the story stopped being about an unknown body in a lot. It became about Elizabeth Short, a real person, a real family, a real murder. The press fed on the case immediately. Short's murder became a media obsession, and the coverage was sensational, invasive, and often cruel. Newspapers did not just report the crime, they built a spectacle around it. False rumors spread fast, so did lurid theories about how she died and who she had been. The public was handed fragments, lies, and exaggerations until the victim almost disappeared behind the legend. Later historical accounts note that the media frenzy became part of the case itself, shaping what the public believed and making the investigation even more difficult. And that is where the darkness deepens, because the killer did not just vanish. He taunted the city. On January 24th, someone claiming to be the killer called the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner and said police should expect souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail. 3 days later, the paper received a manila envelope with cut-and-paste lettering and a note announcing, "Here is Dahlia's belongings." Inside were personal items belonging to Elizabeth Short. The packet had been cleaned with gasoline, and police suspected it had come directly from the killer. That was the moment the case stopped feeling like a murder investigation and started feeling like a game being played against the police. On January 26th, another letter arrived. Here it is. Turning in wed, Jan 29, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police. Black Dahlia Avenger. Police waited. The killer did not show. Instead, another cut and pasted letter arrived saying the person had changed their mind and that the killing was justified. That is the part that gets under your skin. Not just the murder, the confidence. the mockery. The sense that whoever did this was watching the city panic and enjoying every second of it. And because the press was already feasting on the case, the killer's letters were gasoline on an open fire. Every new clue became a headline. Every headline pulled in more attention. The city became a machine for rumor. Police were flooded with leads, confessions, and false tips. The case became a magnet for attention, fantasy, and obsession. By the time the first wave of investigation settled, Los Angeles was drowning in theories and dead ends. The media frenzy made it worse. Every rumor became a headline. Every headline became another distraction. Later summaries of the case described the avalanche of false confessions, suspect theories, and public obsession that swamped the original investigation. And when a murder turns into a public obsession, the truth starts to get buried under noise. The police chased medical theories because the body had been cut with unusual precision. They questioned people tied to the city's medical and professional circles. They looked for anyone who could have had the skill, the nerve, and the opportunity. But nothing stuck. The more they searched, the more the case spread out in every direction like spilled ink. This is where the story starts to feel almost cinematic in the worst possible way. Because when a murder is messy, you can imagine panic. But when it is cleaned, staged, and followed by taunting letters, the mind starts searching for something colder. A doctor, a butcher, a liar, someone who knew exactly how to move through the city without being caught, someone who wanted to be noticed, someone who still got away. The investigation was also made harder by the culture around it. In 1947, crime scene handling was nothing like it is now. The area had already drawn attention. Reporters were swarming. Word spread quickly. Tips came in constantly, and many were worthless. A case that needed patience, discipline, and evidence instead became a storm of speculation. That pressure did not just waste time. It helped the mystery survive. And that is why the Black Dahlia case still feels alive. Not because of one single clue, because there were too many, or maybe because none of them were ever strong enough. The Black Dahlia case is remembered for its violence, but it is just as much a story about disappearance. Elizabeth Short vanished from the world, and the killer vanished behind noise. People still talk about the case as though the answer must be hiding in one final clue. But the truth is uglier than that. The clues were there, the body was there, the letters were there, the police had a crime scene, a name, a trail of attention, and a city full of witnesses. What they did not have was a clean solution. Instead, the investigation turned into a swamp of possibility. Suspects were chased, allegations multiplied, people confessed falsely, families were dragged into it, newspapers kept feeding the story because the story sold, and every time the public thought the killer might finally be pinned down, the trail slipped away again. Histories of the case continue to point out how deeply the press coverage and the flood of speculation complicated the search for the truth. Some theories pointed to men with medical backgrounds, others tied the murder to different crimes or different suspects entirely. Over the decades, the case has remained a magnet for theory after theory, but no conclusion has ever become official fact. The FBI still lists the murder as unsolved. That uncertainty is part of why the story still feels so alive. There is no final arrest, no confession that closes everything, no clean ending. Just a body found in a lot, a city consumed by rumor, and a killer who seemed to know how to turn the entire investigation into theater. And maybe that is what makes the Black Dahlia case so disturbing. Not just that Elizabeth Short was murdered, but that her murder was turned into a performance, a spectacle, a legend, the kind of case that gets remembered forever because it never lets people feel settled. In the end, the Black Dahlia murder is not just one of America's most famous unsolved cases. It is one of its most poisonous. A young woman was found brutally murdered in a vacant lot, and the city around her turned the crime into a spectacle. The killer taunted the press, police chased shadows, the public fed on the mystery, and Elizabeth Short slowly became a legend built from tragedy, distortion, and unanswered questions. But if you strip away the headlines, the theory boards, and the decades of speculation, the image that remains is far simpler and far more disturbing. A foggy morning, a quiet street, a woman walking with her child, and in a vacant lot, a body waiting to be found. Somewhere in Los Angeles, someone knew exactly what happened to Elizabeth Short, and even now, all these years later, that person is still out there in the dark. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more real cases, internet mysteries, and stories that only get darker the deeper you look.